The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the peaceful kind that comes after a long day, but the sort that presses against your chest like something is waiting to reveal itself. And then, there it was. My husband's old safe sitting wide open, gaping like a wounded animal. Papers spilling onto the bedroom rug. Metal edges bent where someone had pried at it without care or fear. Not even respect. Before you continue, take a deep breath. What happened to me that night could happen to any mother. Stay with me, you won't want to miss a single moment. For a second I didn't breathe. Not because I was scared, but because the disrespect punched harder than any fear could. That safe was the one thing my husband had touched every week without fail. His fingers had worn down the handle's brass finish. Seeing it open like trash someone had kicked through, it felt like I'd walked into a stranger's nightmare. But I didn't scream. Not a sound left me. Instead, I shut the door behind me gently as if I were afraid of disturbing whoever, or whatever, had caused this. My hand lingered on the knob longer than necessary, steadying myself but also listening. Old habits. An older woman's instincts. The air smelled wrong. Like the window had been open minutes ago and shut too fast. I glanced toward it and sure enough, the rain on the sill hadn't dried. A few droplets still clung to the frame. Someone had entered from there. Someone who knew that the front door alarm chimed too loudly when opened. My heart wasn't racing. It was slowing down, sinking into something focused and strange. That's what betrayal does when you're old enough. You don't panic. You calculate. I stepped further into the room, shoes sinking into the soft rug. The lamp on the dresser was still on, casting a warm pool of light over the chaos. My eyes swept the floor. Papers from the safe lay everywhere. Bank statements, legal envelopes, the old folder with my husband's retirement plans. Someone had searched fast and sloppy. Not for jewelry. Not for cash. For documents. Important documents. Of course, I whispered to myself, barely moving my lips. The unknown number. The call. The voice telling me to go home immediately. It hadn't been a prank. It had been a warning. My breath left me in a long, measured exhale. For a moment the house creaked. An old timber sound, familiar, but tonight it felt different. I turned, scanning the hallway. It was empty, too empty, as though someone had held their breath there only minutes before. I moved slowly, careful not to disturb anything. I'm 68. I've learned that rushing only leads to missing the truth. And I needed the truth tonight. Near the safe door, a muddy footprint smeared into the carpet fibers. Brownish, not fully dried. The pattern wasn't mine. The size wasn't mine. The shape wasn't mine. I crouched carefully, my knees complaining as they always do, and touched the edge of the print. Still damp. Whoever was here had left not long ago. I stood again, pressing one palm to my back as I straightened fully. I allowed myself one steadying breath before turning toward the dresser. The top drawer was slightly open. Not the bottom, not the side one, the top. The one where I kept easily missed things. Letters. Keys. Password lists. It told me they didn't know everything. They were searching blindly, desperately. My fingers hovered over the drawer handle. Then I stopped myself. No fingerprints. No smudges. Leave it untouched. Let whoever did this believe I'm confused, slow, disorganized. Just like they always whisper when they think I can't hear. I stepped back and looked around the room again. This time I paid attention to the smaller details. The things that mattered. The lock on the window latch had been scratched. My nightstand was moved half an inch closer to the bed. My reading glasses weren't on the book where I left them. They were on the opposite side, near the lamp. Someone had been in here long enough to make themselves comfortable while invading my space. The disrespect sank in deeper. But then, something else hit me. Harder. Sharper. The folder containing my will wasn't on the floor. It wasn't in the safe. It wasn't anywhere visible. That folder had been tucked behind the safe wall panel, hidden in a place only one person knew existed. My son. I showed it to him when his father passed, explaining what went where, what to handle if something happened to me. He'd nodded and said, "Of course, Mom. I'd never let anything go wrong." That folder was gone. My throat tightened, not from fear but from bitter clarity. I closed my eyes for a moment and steadied myself with a hand on the dresser. My pulse didn't spike. It settled into a deep, heavy thud. "I see," I whispered. My phone buzzed in my pocket, making me jump slightly. The vibration felt too loud in the quiet room. I pulled it out carefully. The same unknown number from earlier flashed across the screen. My thumb hovered. Then I answered. A low voice whispered, "You went inside?" I frowned. "Who is this? You shouldn't be there alone." "Why?" I kept my voice calm, steady. "Older women learn to hide panic well. They're coming back." Before I could ask who, the line went dead. No sound. No explanation. I stared at the phone for a long moment, then slipped it into my cardigan pocket. My hand shook slightly, not from fear but from something colder. Something determined. A car engine hummed faintly outside, followed by tires slowing on gravel. I froze beside the window and peered through the slit of the curtain. Headlights swept across the yard. A shadow stepped out. I couldn't see the face, not clearly, but the outline, the stance, the familiarity hit hard. My son's SUV. He never arrived quietly. He always slammed doors, always stomped like an impatient child. Tonight, though, he was silent. He moved like someone who didn't want to be seen entering his own mother's home. Another figure got out on the passenger side. Smaller. Slighter. Her hair tied up like she was going to a dinner party, not creeping up to my door at nearly 9:15 at night. My daughter-in-law. My stomach turned, not from fear, but from the final confirmation I didn't want. I stepped back from the curtain slowly, silently, breaths shallow. My heart thudded, steady but heavy, like a drum being struck in a distant room. My hands shook, so I clasped them together tightly to stop the trembling. Footsteps approached the porch. Soft. Controlled. Practiced. A whisper outside. "You sure she's still at the dinner?" "She should be. She never leaves early. I want that document tonight." I swallowed the lump rising in my throat. They thought I was gone. They thought they had time. They thought I was too old, too trusting, too slow to see through them. The disrespect wrapped around me like a cold cloak. But I didn't hide. I didn't run. I stepped into the hallway, turned the lock on the front door myself, and stood in full view of the frame as the knob rattled gently from the outside. A faint gasp. Then my son's voice. "Mom." I didn't answer. I reached up, turned on the porch light, and let it flood through the window beside the door. Their shadows sharpened instantly. I lifted my chin, squared my shoulders, and took one slow step forward so they could see me clearly through the glass. My son's eyes widened. My daughter-in-law's lips parted, fear flickering across her face before she smoothed it over with the same fake sweetness she always used when she thought she could manipulate me. "Mom," he said again, softer now, "why are you home?" I didn't blink. I didn't move. I just stared at them, two silhouettes I once loved, now standing outside my door like intruders waiting to be let in again. And I kept staring. Until their smiles faded completely. And for a long, breathless moment none of us moved. The porch light hummed above their heads, casting a sharp glow over their faces. Faces I had known for years, yet tonight they looked like strangers standing on a doorstep they had no right to touch. My son swallowed hard, shifting his weight, and my daughter-in-law forced a tiny, wavering smile as though she could still talk her way through the door. I didn't open it. I simply watched them, watched the way her hand tightened around her purse strap, watched the way his eyes darted from me to the window behind me, pretending to be concerned but really checking whether anyone else was inside. Finally, after a tense beat, I heard his muffled voice through the door. "Mom, why didn't you stay at the dinner?" His tone was soft, too soft. Soft in the way someone speaks when they're not asking a question but measuring your answer. I didn't reply. I stood perfectly still, the door locked, my hand resting on the knob with calm I barely recognized. My silence rattled them more than any accusation could have. My daughter-in-law leaned closer, her voice syrupy sweet. "We were coming to check on you. You know how worried we get." "Why?" Smooth, practiced, and too fast. The street behind them was quiet. The neighbors' lights were all off. The night felt thick with unspoken things. I could smell the damp air from the earlier rain, mixing with the faint scent of the jasmine bush near my porch steps. It anchored me. It reminded me that this was my home, my sanctuary, something they had violated without a second thought. I finally lifted my chin a little higher. "Go home," I said, my voice steady. The words stunned them. I saw it in their eyes. The disbelief, the irritation, the frustration of losing control of a script they thought they had written. My son raised his hand as if he might knock again, but something in my stare stopped him. Slowly, reluctantly, he lowered it. Without another word, I turned off the porch light, letting darkness swallow the front steps, and walked away from the door. Their muffled whispers floated through the wood for a few seconds, quick, nervous, angry, before their footsteps retreated. Only when I heard the car doors close did I finally let my shoulders sink. I stood in the hallway, breathing steadily, feeling the weight of everything pressing around me. The open safe, the missing documents, the whispered conversation outside. And somewhere beneath it all, determination. A quiet, steady flame burning low but unwavering. I walked back to the bedroom. The mess was still there. The safe door hung crooked like a mouth frozen mid-scream. The papers scattered across the floor seemed to accuse me. How could you not have seen it? How did you let it get this far? But I wasn't confused. Not tonight. Tonight, clarity was the only thing I felt. I reached into the drawer of my nightstand and pulled out my small flashlight. The room was lit, but the flashlight helped me see the small details. The fibers disturbed, the fingerprints I couldn't touch, the scuff marks left by shoes that didn't belong to me. I wasn't collecting evidence for the police. I was collecting it for myself. To build a picture of exactly how far they had gone. My hands trembled slightly, but not from fear. It was the tremor that comes when a decision has been made. A decision that can't be taken back. Once I had seen enough, I closed the bedroom door behind me and walked into the living room. The clock on the wall read 9:43 p.m. I knew the hardware store on Maple Road closed late on Saturdays, and if I left now I could still make it. I grabbed my purse and keys and without looking back stepped into the night. The drive was short. The wipers clicked rhythmically across the windshield, smearing the thin film of moisture the fog had settled on the glass. My hands were tight on the steering wheel, but my mind was sharp, focused. I knew what I needed to do, and that clarity felt like strength I hadn't touched in years. When I pushed open the heavy glass door of the hardware store, the scent of metal, dust, and machine oil greeted me. A young man behind the counter glanced up from his magazine, startled to see someone coming in so late. I walked slowly down the aisles, scanning the shelves with purpose. Not the eyes of a frightened woman, but of a woman preparing a quiet war. Motion-triggered cameras. Door sensors. Cloud-connected micro-recorders. Small, inexpensive, and easy to hide. I picked each item carefully, reading the box descriptions with deliberate calm. The cashier tried to make small talk as he rang everything up, but I simply nodded and handed him my card. He placed my items into a brown paper bag, unaware he had just helped me build the first layer of my trap. When I arrived home, the house felt colder, but I didn't mind. I turned on every light, making the rooms glow brightly, and set the bag on the dining table. I took out the cameras first, reading the instructions slowly, adjusting my glasses as needed. The house was silent, but it wasn't oppressive anymore. Felt like preparation. Felt like control. I began with the hallway. A small camera above the doorframe. Another one tucked behind the potted plant where the wall meets the baseboard. Then one in the corner of the bedroom angled toward the safe. Each one connected silently to the app on my phone. No blinking lights. No sound. Invisible. By the time I finished, it was almost midnight. My knees ached and my back stiffened from bending, but the ache felt purposeful. Earned. I rubbed my hands together to warm them and walked to my bedroom dresser. From the second drawer I pulled out a clean, empty envelope. I placed a few blank sheets inside so it had weight, then wrote in large, clear letters across the front. Estate transfer papers. The lie wasn't elegant, but it didn't need to be. It only needed to be tempting. Bait rarely needs to be pretty, just convincing. I placed the envelope on top of the dresser, slightly angled as though I had placed it down in a hurry. Then I stepped back and looked at it from the hallway, imagining how it would appear to someone who believed I was forgetful, careless, aging. Someone who thought I didn't see through them. It looked perfect. I turned off the bedroom light, leaving only the hallway lamp glowing. On purpose. I wanted the envelope to be visible through the cracked door in the morning. I wanted them to think I had no idea what they were after. When I finally sat on the edge of my bed, exhaustion pulled at every muscle, but sleep wouldn't come. My thoughts spun slowly, methodically, like the gears in a clock. I reached for my phone and opened the app. The camera feeds glowed softly on the screen. Empty rooms. Silent hallways. A waiting trap. I lay down, pulling the blanket over my legs, but something made me sit up again. A small sound. Not inside the house, outside. The faint hum of a car passing slowly. I parted the curtains slightly. Headlights drifted across my yard and then disappeared around the bend. Too slow to be casual, too fast to be comfortable. I exhaled through my nose. They were watching. Or checking. Or waiting. Good. Let them. The next morning I woke early, earlier than usual. I brewed coffee, the bitter smell filling the kitchen, calming me. I carried the mug into the living room and sat where I could see the driveway. My phone rested next to me, screen dim but ready. Hours passed quietly. Birds hopped across the porch railing. A neighbor walked her dog. And around noon, just as the sun brightened the side of the house, my phone buzzed softly. Motion detected in the hallway. My heart didn't leap. It settled. I tapped the notification. And there she was. My daughter-in-law slipping silently through my back door, thinking she had outsmarted me again. I leaned back in my chair, fingers wrapped around my warm mug, watching her through the camera feed as she crept toward the bedroom, toward the envelope, toward the lie I had crafted just for her. The trap had begun. And I was very, very awake. And as I watched her from the small screen of my phone, something inside me tightened. Not fear, not even anger, but a strange, steady calm that came from finally seeing clearly. For months, maybe longer, I'd felt something slipping out of place in my own home, but now the truth walked across my hallway in someone else's shoes. My daughter-in-law paused at the bedroom doorway. Her head tilted slightly, the way someone looks when they're checking for sounds, for movement, for witnesses. The camera in the corner caught the shape of her face as she slowly exhaled. Then she stepped inside, her hand brushing lightly along the wall, not for support but to steady her nerves. She knew she was crossing a line. She just didn't think anyone would ever call her on it. I leaned closer to the screen, my coffee growing cold beside me. The morning light poured softly through my living room curtains, warm against my shoulder, but my chest felt heavy. Heavy with disbelief. Heavy with a hurt I had never imagined I would feel from someone I had once hugged at Christmas dinners. She approached the dresser with a confidence that made my stomach twist. There was no hesitation. No guilt. No shame. She lifted the envelope, flipped it over once, and then slipped it straight into her purse. So casual. So familiar. As though she had done it before. As though this house belonged more to her than to me. I felt a shiver roll up my spine. Part of it was betrayal. The other part was the certainty that this wasn't the first time she had been inside my home without permission. My mind raced back to the little things. My missing spare key, a drawer slightly off its place, the impression of shoes near my back door that I'd brushed off as delivery drivers. How long had she been slipping in and out like this? Before I could settle into the thought, the camera picked up movement from the hallway. A shadow. Then my son's voice, low and hurried. Hurry up. She wakes early. He shouldn't have known that. He hadn't lived with me in years. But he knew my habits enough to weaponize them. My daughter-in-law whispered back, I've got it. Stop rushing me. My throat felt tight. Hearing him outside my door last night was one thing. Hearing him inside my house today was entirely different. Together. Coordinated. Confident enough to speak freely because they believed I was naive, predictable, harmless. He stepped into frame finally, pacing along the hallway with a sharp tension in his movements. His jaw was clenched. His hands kept flexing open and closed. I recognized that posture. It was the same one he used to have when he was a teenager trying to hide something from me, except this wasn't a broken vase or a failed test. This was something darker. What if she already mailed the papers? He asked, voice clipped with frustration. She didn't, his wife snapped, zipping her purse. She's too old-fashioned to do anything without thinking 10 times. The comment cut deeper than I expected, and an ache formed behind my ribs. Not because of the insult itself. I've been called worse by people who mattered less. But because my own son didn't correct her. He didn't defend me. He didn't even flinch. He just said, let's go. But the camera didn't stop recording there. And neither did they. Before leaving, my daughter-in-law turned back toward the safe. She stared at it for several seconds, her expression shifting into something sharper, more calculating. She reached out and gently traced the damaged metal with her fingertips. She's losing it, she murmured. She won't even remember she left this open. She better not, my son replied. My chest tightened painfully. The casual cruelty in his voice felt like a blow. I'd raised him. Fed him. Held him through fevers and heartbreaks. And now he sounded like a man who had already accepted a version of me that suited his greed. But the next moment changed everything. My daughter-in-law pulled out her phone and spoke quietly into it. "Yes. We're taking care of it. Don't worry." He paused, listening. Then she said a sentence that made my blood turn cold. "Once she's gone, everything will fall into place." A sound left me then, small, involuntary. Not a gasp. More like a broken exhale I couldn't control. The living room suddenly felt too still. Too bright. Too empty. My fingers tightened around my phone until they ached. I rewound the clip, listening again, hoping I had misheard. But I hadn't. "Once she's gone." Gone. Not moved out. Not in a nursing home. Not after she passes someday. Oh, it was said too smoothly. Too confidently. Too deliberately. Gone. I touched my collarbone, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. For a moment the room seemed to tip slightly, as though the world had shifted under my feet. My eyes blurred with tears I didn't want to shed, tears of disbelief, betrayal, grief. But I didn't let them fall. I inhaled slowly, deeply, grounding myself in the familiar scent of my lemon-scented floor polish and the faint warmth of the heater kicking on. I was still here. Still standing. Still in control. When I looked back at the screen, the video had moved on. They were whispering again, but their voices overlapped too much to make out the words. I leaned forward, adjusting the volume. "Dr. Bills. Creditors won't wait." Her signature. If she just... Then my daughter-in-law hissed sharply, "Stop talking. We're not doing that." Doing what? My stomach knotted. I replayed the snippet again and again, but the audio was muddy. It raised more questions than answers. But one thing was certain. Whatever that referred to, she didn't reject it out of morality. She rejected it out of caution. A small part of me, some quiet, shaking part, wanted to close the app and pretend I hadn't seen any of it. Pretend they had simply taken an envelope and nothing more. Pretend my son wasn't capable of the thoughts implied in that half-sentence. But denial is a luxury older women can't afford. Not when their safety is at risk. Not when their lives can be rearranged by the same hands they once held. I watched as they walked back through the hallway. My son opened the back door, letting in a sliver of sunlight. My daughter-in-law paused halfway through, pulled the envelope from her purse, and held it up briefly with a small, satisfied smile. "A trophy. It's almost over," she whispered. Then they were gone. I sat back slowly, my fingers trembling. My coffee was cold, untouched for over an hour. The house hummed quietly, the refrigerator, the heater, the ticking wall clock. Sounds that usually soothed me. Today they sounded like reminders of how alone I truly was in that moment. I set the phone on the table, pressing my palms against the wooden surface until my breathing steadied. My mind raced, not wildly but with sharp, organized clarity. I needed to think. I needed to understand. The recordings had given me part of the picture but not the whole. What debts were they talking about? What creditors? What pressures were pushing them to the edge of something irreversible? I didn't know those details yet, but the urgency in their voices told me the truth. They were trapped in something bigger than I had realized. And they had decided I was the solution. The thought chilled me to the bone. I stood slowly, stretching the stiffness from my legs. My body moved carefully, deliberately, like someone walking through a memory rather than a room. I walked toward the hallway, each step echoing softly. When I reached the bedroom, the door was still slightly ajar from the night before. I pushed it open fully. The room smelled faintly of their perfume and cologne, a mix of floral sweetness and something sharper. I stepped inside, letting the silence settle around me. The camera blinked its steady, invisible eye. The dresser stood exactly as I had arranged it, except now the envelope was gone. A hollow ache spread through my chest, but beneath it was something else, resolve. Quiet, firm resolve. They thought they had taken something vital. They thought they had gotten ahead. But all they had done was reveal their true selves. I walked to the bed and sat carefully on the edge. My hands rested on my lap, palms open. I let myself feel everything. The hurt, the anger, the confusion, the sadness twisting through me like tangled threads. Then I lifted my chin and looked straight at the camera. "If you caught this," I whispered softly, "what else will you show me?" The answer came sooner than I expected. My phone buzzed again. Motion detected in the living room. My breath caught. Someone else was in the house. And this time, the footsteps were heavier. Slow, deliberate, and nothing like the careful, tiptoeing movements I'd watched through the camera earlier. For a moment, I sat frozen on the edge of my bed, my breath caught halfway in my chest. The house had been empty a moment ago. I'd seen them leave. I had watched the door close behind them. But now someone else was inside. I reached for my phone with trembling fingers. The motion alert still blinked on the screen, but the live feed took a second too long to load. My pulse hammered as I whispered, "Come on. Come on," as if willing the signal to move faster. When the camera finally opened, the angle showed the living room, still empty. No shadow crossing the sofa. No figure moving past the window. But the footsteps were real. And now they were closer. I stood slowly, gripping the edge of the dresser for balance. My bones felt heavy, but my mind was sharp. I reached behind the dresser for the small wooden cane I kept there. Not for support, but because I had always believed a woman living alone should have something solid in hand if needed. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it made me feel less exposed. As I stepped into the hallway, the footsteps stopped altogether. The silence that followed felt thick, like the quiet air before a storm. I kept my eyes on the narrow stretch of hallway leading toward the living room. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, dust motes drifting lazily in the beams. It should have been peaceful. It wasn't. Then I heard it, a faint cough. A man's cough. My heart jumped, but my feet kept moving. When I reached the corner, I leaned just enough to see into the living room without exposing myself fully. And there he was. Not my son. Not any stranger I recognized. It was my electrician. A familiar face. A man named Glenn who had fixed my exterior wiring 2 months earlier. He stood near the fireplace, smoothing down his work jacket as he glanced up at the camera on the ceiling. My brows knit with confusion. "Glenn," I whispered before my brain could stop me. He turned immediately, eyes wide at first, then softening with recognition. "Mrs. Albright? I didn't mean to scare you." My heartbeat steadied slightly, but suspicion rose fast behind it. "What are you doing in my house?" He rubbed his hands together nervously. "Your son, he called me. Said you were having trouble with your smoke detectors again. He told me you'd be out for the morning." My mouth went dry. "Smoke detectors?" "Yeah," he said, nodding. "He said they were chirping nonstop and you'd left the back door unlocked on purpose so I could come in." A cold weight settled in my stomach. My back door had been locked. I had checked it twice before sitting down with my coffee. I swallowed hard. "How did you get inside?" He held up a key. "Your son gave me this weeks ago. Said you'd approved it." A chill shot through me. My son had given a copy of my house key to someone I barely knew, and never told me. My fingers tightened around the cane. "What detectors did he say needed replacing?" I asked. "The hallway one." And his voice trailed off as he noticed the look on my face. "Mrs. Albright, did I do something wrong?" "No," I said softly. "Not you." He glanced around, uneasy. I didn't see anything wrong with the setup, to be honest. Nothing seemed out of place except for that camera. He pointed at the one I'd installed the night before. "That wasn't here last time." I breathed slowly through my nose. "Thank you, Glenn. Truly. But I need to ask you to leave now." He hesitated. "Are you sure? I don't want to leave if you feel unsafe." The word hung in the air like a weight. "I'm fine," I said firmly. "But I'd appreciate you locking the back door behind you." He nodded, concern etched deeply on his face, and headed toward the kitchen. When I heard the back latch click shut, I finally let out the breath I'd been holding. As soon as he was gone, I walked to the kitchen and double-checked the lock myself. Then I slid down into one of the dining chairs, hands trembling. My son had lied to Glenn to gain access to the house earlier. How many times had he used that key? How often had he walked through these rooms when I wasn't home? I stared at the table, but my thoughts raced in every direction. I needed answers. I needed control. And most of all, I needed them to reveal themselves without knowing they were being watched. I looked up at the hallway camera. The envelope trap had worked, but it had only scratched the surface. Now I needed to draw them out fully, not with fear or suspicion, but with their own greed. I spent the next hour cleaning the house. Not because I wanted it tidy, but because cleaning calmed my nerves. I dusted the picture frames, straightened the throw pillows, wiped down the kitchen counter. Physical movement steadied my thoughts. By the time I finished, my plan was taking shape. At 2:30 that afternoon, I picked up the phone and called my son. He answered on the second ring. Mom? You okay? His voice sounded cautious. Careful. Like someone approaching a wild animal they weren't sure was asleep or awake. I found something this morning, I said. I thought you should help me look at it. There was a pause. What did you find? A letter. It looks important, I said, letting my tone hover between confusion and concern. I don't know what it means. He inhaled sharply. We'll be right there. Not, I'll be right there. We. Both of them. Just as I needed. I ended the call without another word. Then I stood quietly in the middle of the living room, the faint tick-tock of the wall clock filling the silence. I felt a strange mixture of dread and cold purpose spreading through me. If they wanted a performance, I would give them one. 30 minutes later, I heard their car pull into the driveway. Their footsteps approached, 2 sets now lighter than earlier but no less urgent. I positioned myself at the dining table, a stack of old letters beside me, and waited. My son walked in first. He didn't knock. He didn't ask permission. He stepped inside as if it were his home and scanned the room quickly, eyes sharp and assessing. My daughter-in-law followed behind him, her smile stiff and her purse hugged close to her side. You said you found a letter? He asked. Yes, I said, sliding an old blank envelope toward the table edge. But I'm not sure I remember putting it there. His wife's eyes flicked to the envelope, then to the dresser in the hallway, then back to me. Her breath caught ever so slightly. Got you, I thought. I've been feeling forgetful, I murmured, lowering my gaze. Maybe I misplaced things. My son exchanged a look with his wife. A look that carried far too much weight. A look of confirmation. A look of triumph. You know, he said gently, we've been thinking, maybe it's time we help you with some of your paperwork. Oh. I lifted my eyes. Yes, my daughter-in-law added, pulling out a chair across from me. We want to make sure things don't get too overwhelming. Overwhelming. The word tasted like poison coming from her mouth. They were getting closer. And they didn't even realize how much they were revealing. I leaned back slightly. What do you think should happen? There. A simple question. An invitation they couldn't resist. My son cleared his throat. Well, we could go through your financial documents with you. Make sure everything is in order. And help you sign anything important, his wife added quickly. That was the moment I knew, truly knew, they were ready to dig their own grave. I nodded slowly. That sounds helpful. Their eyes lit up. Why don't we start now? I said softly. Everything you want to look at is in my bedroom. Their excitement was almost palpable. My daughter-in-law stood first, straightening her blouse. Let me help you gather things. No, I said gently. You two go ahead. I'll follow. For the briefest moment they hesitated. Then greed overtook caution. They walked toward the bedroom. Hand in hand. Straight into the cameras. Straight into the trap. And I followed slowly behind them, the cane tapping softly against the floor, my heartbeat steady with a calm I hadn't felt in days. This was the day I let them dig their own grave. I followed them down the hallway, watching the backs of their heads as they moved with a kind of greedy excitement they weren't even trying to hide anymore. Their whispers floated between them, little fragments of plans they thought I couldn't hear. Once we sign everything, she won't even notice. It'll look legitimate. Each word fed the resolve in my chest until it felt like a quiet fire warming my ribs. They crossed the bedroom threshold ahead of me, stepping directly into the camera's perfect line of sight. My daughter-in-law rushed for the dresser first, eager, almost trembling. My son stood near the safe, scanning the room like a man imagining his future wealth. They didn't even notice that I hadn't turned on the bedroom light. They didn't notice the small green glow of the recording indicator reflected faintly in the glass frame of my wedding photo. They didn't even notice me pause in the doorway, watching them expose themselves with every motion. But the camera noticed. Every second. My daughter-in-law pulled drawers open one after another, her movements frantic, her voice sharpening. Where is it? She must have moved it. My son's jaw clenched. She's hiding things now. She's slipping, I'm telling you. This is exactly why we can't wait anymore. Wait for what? The question throbbed through my chest like a bruise. And I knew then the moment had come. The moment where I stopped letting them lead and instead forced them into the open. I stepped forward, letting the cane tap more loudly this time. They both flinched and whipped around, guilt flashing so plainly across their faces that it almost stunned me. There they were, my boy, the child I raised, and the woman he chose, standing in my bedroom like thieves caught mid-crime. "What are you doing?" I asked quietly. My daughter-in-law's smile flickered so fast it was almost comical. "Oh, we were just helping." My son swallowed. "You told us to look, Mom." I met their eyes one at a time, letting my silence stretch until they shifted uncomfortably. "I said I would bring things to you," I reminded them softly. The lie on their faces tightened. My son stepped forward as if to guide me out. "You must have gotten mixed up, Mom. It's okay. We're here now." "No," I said, holding my ground. "I'm not confused." For the first time since the break-ins began, fear flickered between them. Not fear of me, but fear of what I knew. What I had seen. I let that fear sit with them for one long, cold moment. Then I said, "I need both of you to leave. Now." My daughter-in-law's mask cracked. "You don't get to tell us." My voice rose slightly, not loud but sharp. "Get out." She froze. My son's eyes widened, his mouth opening and closing like he wanted to argue but suddenly didn't have the right words. I pointed toward the hallway, my hands steady. "This is my home," I said. "You will not search it again." They hesitated. They fumbled. But eventually they walked out. First her, furious and shaking, then him, avoiding my gaze like a scolded child. When the front door slammed behind them, I closed my eyes and let myself feel the weight of what had just happened. My legs trembled. My breathing stuttered. But I didn't collapse. I stood tall until the shaking faded. Then I moved. I gathered every recording, every still image, every timestamp. I forwarded them to my lawyer and to the bank investigator I had met with before. I wrote a long statement describing everything, from the false smoke detector entry to the break-ins to their verbal admissions about taking over my finances. By the time I finished, dusk had settled over the neighborhood. The house was silent except for the soft ticking of the hallway clock. And then, nothing. No calls from my son. No knocks on the door. Just silence. It stayed that way through the night. And then the morning came. I woke before dawn, the house still wrapped in shadows. My joints ached as I sat up in bed, but there was a strange lightness in my chest. A sense of something coming. Something inevitable. I dressed slowly, choosing a thick sweater because the house felt colder than usual. When I stepped into the living room, the sky outside was barely gray, not yet fully awake. I made a cup of tea and sat by the window, listening to the quiet hum of the early morning. And then I heard it. A car engine. Then another. Then the unmistakable sound of doors slamming, not rushed but steady, coordinated. I set my tea down and walked to the front window. 3 police cars lined my son's driveway. Officers stepped out in dark uniforms, their voices low but firm as they approached the front door. My son appeared in the doorway seconds later, hair uncombed, wearing the same hoodie he always wore when stressed. His face drained of color the moment he saw the badges. My daughter-in-law materialized behind him, her voice rising in protest as one of the officers asked them to step outside. I opened my window just a crack, enough to hear, not enough to be seen. Unlawful entry. Attempted fraud. Evidence provided. Videotaped incidents. My daughter-in-law's voice grew shrill. "She's lying. He's old. She doesn't remember things. This is a mistake." One of the officers held up a printed still image captured by my camera, the moment she slipped the envelope into her purse. Her protest died mid-sentence. My son tried a different angle. "Mom must have misunderstood, we were helping." Another printed image. Him unlocking my back door with a key I never gave him. His shoulders slumped. Within minutes they were being escorted to separate cars. My daughter-in-law burst into tears, wild and loud, her mascara streaking down her cheeks. My son looked smaller than I had ever seen him, his eyes unfocused, his lips trembling as if he still couldn't accept what was happening. One of the officers turned toward my house, looking for confirmation perhaps, or acknowledgement. I stepped back from the window instinctively, my heartbeat quick but not panicked. Instead of going outside, I returned to my tea. I held the warm mug between my palms and exhaled slowly. A strange peace washed over me, not joy, not triumph, but relief. The kind of relief that comes after surviving a storm you never asked for. After enduring a betrayal you never deserved. After discovering a strength you didn't know you still had. The police cars eventually pulled away. The morning sun had risen fully by then, casting gold across my living room floor. I stood at the window again, watching the quiet street, the empty driveway next door, the world settling into a new shape. I wasn't shaking anymore. Around noon my lawyer called. "Everything has been filed," she said. "You did the right thing." At first I couldn't speak. My throat felt tight, but this time from emotion, not fear. "I never wanted it to come to this," I whispered. "Wanting peace doesn't make you weak," she replied gently. "It makes you human. Protecting yourself makes you wise." After the call, I stepped onto my porch with another cup of tea. The winter breeze brushed my cheeks. The neighborhood was busy with its usual sounds. Kids heading to school, a dog barking, someone starting their car across the street. Life continued. But I was different. I had walked through betrayal and come out standing. I had chosen truth over denial. I had protected myself when no one else would have. And as I looked at the quiet house next door, still and empty, I whispered softly to myself. They dug their own grave. I simply stopped filling it in for them. I sat down in my rocking chair, the wood creaking gently beneath me, and took a long sip of tea. The warmth spread through me, grounding me, reminding me that I was still here, still strong, still whole. For the first time in a long time, I felt safe. For the first time in years, I felt free. And for the first time in decades, I remembered what it felt like to reclaim my life with my own two hands. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of your own strength, subscribe. I share real, emotional stories for women like us. Stories of courage, justice, and the quiet power we often forget we have.